Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. The first two articles of question 26 of Thomas Aquinas Summa Theologiae, Prima Secundae, have to do with the nature of love, which is a topic that he's particularly keen to help unpack because there's a lot of confusions about this that arise. And one of these has to do with what is its status? Is love simply a passion of the human soul, or is there more to it than that? This is particularly important given that, for Christians, God is love. Thomas needs to take account of that. And so he's going to frame it in terms of a sort of psychology, we could say, that he is relying upon, which, of course, not everybody buys into, but he's developing this. It was quite a common one for medieval thinkers. It's drawing partly upon Aristotle and some other thinkers as well. So the two questions that he's going to be raising, or the issues, is love in what he's calling the concupiscible power, right? The part of us that desires. Concupiscence is desire. It's directed towards certain objects. So is that where love sits? Now, this is going to have a kind of technical meaning. It's not just any desire whatsoever, as we're going to see. And then the question that he's going to ask after that is, well, is love itself just a passio, a passion, which we might be tempted to translate as emotion as well? Or is there more to love than that? If it's just a passion, then that means that there's a lot of other, let's say, implications that go along with that. So he's beginning with, as usual, some objections, some arguments against the position he holds. In the very first article, one objection is it would seem love is not in the concupiscible power. Why? Because wisdom is something that I've loved and sought her out from my youth, but the concupiscible power, being part of the sensible or sensitive appetite, cannot tend to wisdom. So love is not in the concupiscible power because you're loving something that you can't directly perceive, right? The next one, love seems to be identified with every passion. This is going to be an interesting one. He says that Augustine on the City of God is going to say, love, yearning for the object beloved, is desire, having and enjoying it is joy, fleeing what is contrary to it is fear, feeling what is contrary to it is sadness. But, like he says, not every passion is in the concupiscible power. Fear is in the irascible power, and we'll explain that in just a bit. So we can't say that love is in there because love takes many forms. Then the third one, Dionysus, pseudo-Dionysus actually, mentions a natural love, and this seems to have to do with the lower part of the soul. So love is not just in the sensitive appetite or the concupiscible appetite. So this forces Thomas to clarify some matters. And so he says, okay, so love is something pertaining to appetite, appetitus. Why? Because good is the object of both of these. And so love is going to differ according to the difference, secundum differentiam, of the appetite. So what are the appetites? Well, we have a natural appetite, as Thomas is going to say. We have a concupiscible appetite, which is what the topic discussed here is. We have an irascible appetite, also part of the sensitive, as is the concupiscible. And then we have what he calls intellectual appetite, which is will, voluntas, the part of us that is directed to general goods, that is distinctively human, tied up with rationality. So each of these is an appetite. And he says, let's talk about the natural. There's one that arises from an apprehension, grasping something, not in the subject of the appetite, but something else. This is what we call the natural appetite. Natural things seek what is suitable, quod convenit in Latin, what is appropriate to them, what conduces to continuing their existence. And they seek what's suitable to them according to their nature by reason of an apprehension which is not in them, but in the author of their nature. And Thomas refers back to earlier parts of the Summa. And then he's going to talk about other appetites. We also have the sensitive appetite, which is arising from an apprehension in the subject, the thing that is feeling the appetite, but from necessity, not from free will or more literally judgment, right? And this is, he says, in irrational animals, the sensitive appetite. This is what drives them. The dog sees the dog food over there, and it smells it, and it's like, oh, I'm going over there. I'm going to eat something nice that has been left out there for me. It's very straightforward, right? And so that is the sensitive appetite that includes the concupiscible and the irascible. The irascible is when there's some sort of need to pursue what Thomas Aquinas will call the difficult good, right? Where there's some sort of resistance that has to be overcome, or some difficulty, or, anything along those lines. So the other, he says, is an appetite following freely from an apprehension in the subject of the appetite. This is the rational or intellectual appetite, which is called the will. Now, each of these has a kind of love in it. So he says the name love is given to the principal movement towards the end loved. What is it that the principle of the movement in natural appetite, what he calls connaturality, having the similar kind of nature, this, what is suitable for it to the thing that it tends, and we can call this natural love. Love is being used in kind of a metaphorical way there, of course, though. So, it rests in that when it has it, and he talks about, this gives you an idea of what he has in mind, the connaturalness of a heavy body for the center, gravity itself, right? So we can also talk about the sensitive appetite, and he says, in like manner, the appetite of the sensitive appetite, or of the will to some good, is a complacency in the good, a being pleased together with it, quite frankly. So, you can have either of these, and then he says sensitive love is going to be in the sensitive appetite, and intellectual love is in the intellectual appetite. Our will loves some things, but it doesn't love it in the same way that the sensitive appetite does. And then he says, where in the sensitive appetite is it going to be? So remember, we have the concupiscible and the irascible, two parts of the sensitive appetite. They are driven by our sense perception, or they involve it to some degree, or the imagination. And he says it belongs to the concupiscible power, not the irascible, because it regards good absolutely, not under the aspect of difficulty. So we've managed to locate love in the concupiscible appetite. Is it not also in natural love and in the will? No, it's in there too. But it definitely is in, at least certain love, in the concupiscible appetite. And so he's going to say, to clarify these objections, we can make a distinction between intellectual or rational love and sensitive love. That answers the first objection. The second objection, Thomas is going to say, well, love isn't literally fear or desire. It's a cause of that. So it's not as if each of these is just a type of love. And then he talks about the third objection. Natural love is not only in the powers of the vegetal soul, but all of the soul's powers. All of them have this aspect of natural love. And so that's why Dionysius talked in those ways. So that deals with the first set of problems. Then the second thing is, well, is love a passion? And we might say, is love just a passion? That's the key issue here. So again, there's going to be some objections being raised. Love is not a passion. Why? Because no power is a passion, but every love is a power. So, can't be a passion. That's kind of a metaphysical or anthropological one. Second, love is a kind of union or bond, as Augustine says, but a union is not a passion, but rather a relation. You notice the way these objections are working. Love is this thing over here, and that's not the same thing as a passion, so a love can't be a passion. Then the third thing, a passion is some sort of movement or change, but love does not imply the movement of the appetite. That's actually desire, of which movement, love is the principle, so love is not a passion. And Thomas is going to say, well, let's consider what it is to be a passion. And now we're going beyond just emotions. We're talking about any sort of effect that something has on something else as being a passion. So he says, passion is the effect of the agent, the thing doing something, on the patient, the thing suffering something. A natural agent, as he's going to say, is going to produce a twofold effect on the patient. In the first place, it gives it its form and movement. So it makes the thing be the way it is, and it also impels it. It gets it started, right? So again, bodies that want to fall. Obviously, this is not our physics, but it's the physics that Thomas is working with. The generator gives the generated body both weight and the movement resulting from weight so that it will go downward, and this is a kind of natural love. Now, we're not really that interested in that. Then we have the appetitive. And the appetitive powers, which include, the intellectual appetite as well as the sensitive, they give the appetite itself, right, a certain adaptation, a certain direction to itself, which consists in complacency in the object, wanting that object, and from this follows movement towards the appetitive object. So the first change, he says, wrought in the appetite by the appetitable object, the object that can be desired, is called love and is nothing other than complacency in that object. And this produces a movement towards that object. And he's going to clarify some things here. So first we have the complacency in the object. I'm receptive to it. I like it. And then the movement towards it is, in fact, desire, which is a different passion. And then the rest in it, when you actually have what it is that you love, that you desired, you feel joy, gaudium, right? You feel good about that sort of thing. So that's different than what's happening with the natural love. But this is the love that we could say has to do with the sensitive appetite, the concupiscence, or with the will. Right? So he's going to go on and say that love can be understood as a passion in the concupiscible. So insofar as love is something that we do feel through our sense perception of things, it does make sense to call it a passion. In the will, it's not exactly a passion as such. It does have some things in common with it, but he says that it's a more general or communitaire, right, more common, universal, and extended sense or meaning in the will, in the intellectual appetite. So it's not really a passion there, but it is a passion because it does exist in the sensitive appetite, right? And you could actually have it at both levels at the same time. That's very common. So he says, okay, so now we can consider these objections. Power denotes a principle of movement or action, so that's why Dionysius calls love a power, because it's a principle of movement for the appetite. That doesn't mean that it can't be a passion. The second one, union belongs to love. The lover stands in relation to that which they love as though it were part of himself or part of himself. So love is not the very relation of union, but the union is a result of love. And this is something he's going to talk about in a later question and an article. And then finally, the third one, okay, love does not denote the movement of the appetite towards the appetitive object, but it does denote the movement whereby the appetite is changed by the appetible object so as to have complacency therein. So that means that, this issue of, passion is not a movement, that can be satisfactorily dealt with as well. So what do we get from this? Love is in multiple, we could say, places, metaphorically, within us. And at least in some of them, it is indeed a passion of the human soul. So it can be treated with the rest. Is love merely a passion? Not for Thomas. And that has to do in part with the fact that it's something else natural on some level, but also an act of the will, which is not merely a passion or emotion.